and physiology of the nervous system. Let's start with the introduction. I want to say that the nervous system is a highly complex network of nerves that coordinate, generate, transmit sensory information by transmitting signal to and from the body part. This network of nerves that coordinate the function of the body by processing sensory information, controlling movement, facilitating communication between the different parts of the body. Now, I want to say that the nervous system is divided into two: the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. I want to also say that the central nervous system is divided into the brain and the spinal cord. The brain and the spinal cord. The brain receives and processes sensory information. It initiates impulses or responses. It also stores memories, generates thoughts, and emotions, while the spinal cord conduct signal to and from the brain, and then it also control reflex activities. Now, the peripheral nervous system is divided into two: the motor neuron and the sensory neuron. Now, the motor neuron are responsible for carrying impulses from the CNS to the muscles and gland, while the sensory carry impulses from the organs to the CNS. The motor neuron is further divided into two: the somatic and the autonomic. The autonomic is responsible for involuntary responses. It controls involuntary responses. Why? The somatic controls voluntary movement. Somatic are responsible for voluntary movement. The autonomic is divided into two: the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. The sympathetic are responsible for fight and flight, while the parasympathetic is responsible for rest and digest. Okay, so let's start with the first division of the central nervous system, which is the brain. All right, so the brain is further divided into three: the forebrain, which is also known as the prosencephalon; the midbrain, known as the mesencephalon; and then the hindbrain, known as the rhombocephalon. Okay, so let's start with the forebrain. I want to say that the forebrain is divided into three: the cerebrum, the diencephalon, and the telecephalon. The cerebrum is the major division of the brain. I mean, two-thirds of the brain is the cerebrum. All in other words, put 80% of the brain is occupied by the cerebrum. All right, so then the diencephalon. Let's look at the diencephalon. The diencephalon include the thalamus, the hypothalamus, and the epithalamus, where you have the pineal gland. And then we have the telecephalon. The telecephalon have structures like the cerebral cortex. And the cerebral cortex, we have the divisions of the cerebral cortex, where we have the frontal lobe, the parental lobe, the temporal lobe, and the occipital lobe. We also have the basal ganglion, and we have the basal ganglion. Then we have, that is the two structures that make up the telecephalon, which is what? The cerebral cortex and the basal ganglion. Then we move to the second division, which is the midbrain. The midbrain, which we also say is known as the mesencephalon. The midbrain, which is known as the mesencephalon. We want to say that the midbrain is composed of the tectum. We have the tectum, we have the cerebral pendicle, we have the substantia nigra. Those are the three parts of the midbrain, or components of the midbrain. I want to say that the midbrain and the hindbrain joins together to form the brainstem. The midbrain and the hindbrain join together to form the brainstem. I want to say that this combination, that's the midbrain and the hindbrain, joined to form the brainstem, links the cerebrum to the spinal cord. What links the cerebrum to the spinal cord is the brainstem, where you have the hindbrain and the midbrain. Okay, so let's look at the hindbrain. Let's look at the hindbrain. I want to say that the hindbrain is further divided into two: the metacephalon and the mylecephalon. Why the metacephalon is the upper part of the hindbrain, which consists of the pons. The metacephalon is composed of what? The upper part of the hindbrain, where you have what? The pons. And then the melencephalon is the lower part of the hindbrain. The lower part of the hindbrain, which is made up of what? The medulla oblongata. It consists of the medulla oblongata. So otherwise put, the midbrain, the pons, and the medulla oblongata forms the brain stem, which link what? The cerebrum to the spinal cord. All right, so let's stop in this division here for today. When we come again, we'll look into this in detail when we are doing other aspects of the brain. But let us dive into the nervous tissue. Let us dive into the nervous tissue. I want to say that the nervous tissue is divided into two: the neurons and the neuroglia. The neurons and the neuroglia. Let us dive into looking at the neurons. Let's look at the neurons. I want to say that the neurons are the fundamental building block of the nervous system. Just as we have the fundamental unit of the human body, the cell, we have the fundamental unit, building block of the nervous system as the neurons. I want to say that they are electrically excitable mass of cells. Neurons are electrically excitable mass of cells, meaning that they carry impulses. The neurons carry impulses. But one thing about the neurons is that they don't undergo cell division. Therefore, they are maintained and sustained by blood, oxygen, and glucose. The death of the neurons are irreversible. That is why whenever we have deficiency in blood, we tend to lift the foot of the bed so that blood, oxygen, and every other nutrient will get to the brain, so that the brain cells will not die, because death of the cells are irreversible. Okay, so let us look at other characteristics of the neurons. I want to say that the neurons are divided into the cell bodies. Neurons are divided into the cell bodies, the dendrites, axons, and the axons terminal. Neurons are divided into what? Into cell bodies, dendrites, axons, and axon terminal. I want to say that another name for the cell body is a soma. So if you want to call it cell body, we call it the soma. I want to say that it is a key component of the neurons, also known as the nerve cell. I want to say that they contain the nucleus. The cell bodies contain what? The nucleus. They also contain the cell organelles. Cell body contain the nucleus and cell organelles. I want to say that they are responsible for maintaining the cell's health, that the neurons' health. So if the neurons are healthy, it is maintained by the cell body. I want to say that the cell bodies also produces protein. They produces protein, and that this protein help in nourishing the neurons. They help in nourishing the neurons. I want to say that number one function of the cell body is that it houses the nucleus, which contain what? The DNA material, or the gene material known as the DNA. I want to also say that another function is that it produces protein, and that this protein contain ribosomes and endoplasmic reticulum. So that means the cell body has what? Ribosomes and endoplasmic reticulum that produces what? Proteins, and these proteins are needed by the neurons. They are needed by the neurons. And then they are also responsible for processing incoming signal from the dendrites. The cell bodies are responsible for what? Processing incoming signal from the dendrites and determine whether to generate an action potential or not. That is the work of the cell body. We move further to look at the second division of the neurons, which is the dendrites. Now let's look at the dendrite. The dendrite receives signal from other neurons and convert them to the cell bodies. So the dendrites, they collect what? Signal from where? From other neurons and convert them to the cell bodies. What of axons? I want to say that the axons are long, tiny projection or long thin projection. They transmit impulses away from the cell bodies to other neurons. So what carry impulses from the cell bodies to the other neuron is a axons, while dendrites carry from other neurons towards the cell body. Axons carry away from the cell bodies to other neurons. We also have the axons terminal. They are the endpoint of axons. They are the endpoints of axons. That is where you have there's a release of neurotransmitters. You remember the neurotransmitters? We'll talk about them in detail in a short while. We say they communicate with other neurons. Neurotransmitters are responsible for communicating with other neurons. All right, we'll talk about that in a short while. So, in summary, we want to say that the cell bodies, as you can see from this diagram, carry impulses towards the other, the cell body or the dendrites carry impulses from other neuron towards the cell body, while the cell body carry impulses to the axons. So the axons carry impulses to other neurons, Okay, so that is what we want to just classify. Then in these axons, we want to say that these axons are divided into two. The axons, they are divided into two. We have the myelinated axons and the non-myelinated axons. We have the myelinated axons and the non-myelinated axons. Now, the myelinated axons are covered by what? They are covered by insulators. They are all covered by myelin sheet. These myelin sheets are insulators. They speed up neural impulses. Myelin sheets speed up neural impulses. They speed up neural impulses. That is what the myelin sheet does. Why the one that is without myelin, which is called the non-myelinated, axons, they don't do much. They don't do much. The reason is because they still carry impulses, but the impulses are not as fast as the one that has myelin sheets. Okay, so let's look at types of neurons. We have types of neurons. They carry impulses. Okay, let's start with the sensory neurons. The sensory neurons carry impulses from the organs or glands or body to the brain, while the motor neurons carry impulses from the CNS. They carry sensory impulses from the CNS to the muscles and glands. Then we have the interneurons. The interneuron, they conduct impulses within the CNS. They conduct impulses within the CNS. Now, neurons don't join end to end. That is one thing we want to say again. Neurons don't join end to end. They have synapse in between neurons. Synapse. And these synapses transmit signal through electrochemical signal. They transmit signal through electrochemical signal. They transmit signal through electrochemical signal. Okay, but before we dive into that part of the lesson, before we dive into this part of the lesson where you have this part we are trying to talk about now, let us go back again and summarize a little between the types of axons. Remember, we said there are two types of axons. We have the myelinated axons and the non-myelinated axons. The myelinated axons have the glial cells, which we also call the neuroglians, and that they produce the myelin sheets. They are responsible for production of the myelin sheet. Now, the Neuroglia that produces myelin sheet in the CNS, in the central nervous system, are called the oligodendrocytes, while the one that produces myelin sheet in the peripheral nervous system are called the quam cells. All right, the myelin sheet, what we have said that they increase what electrical signal by insulation through saltatory conduction. I want to say that there are gaps that exist between myelin sheet where axons membranes are exposed. Those gaps are known as the node of Ranvier. They are known as the node of Ranvier. Then the non-myelinated axons, we say they are axons that are loosely enveloped by glial cells or neuroglia. They conduct nerve impulses more slowly because action potential must propagate continuously. All right. So we have talked about the types of neuron. We don't need to talk about them in details again, but we already know that. So let's look at these neurotransmitters. Remember, we have said that impulses on neurons don't join end to end. Neurons, they don't join end to end. They are joined by synapse. They are joined by synapse. Now, we say what happens between two neurons is called electrochemical signal. Now, why the electrical activity happens in the neurons, the chemical activities happen in the synapse. I repeat, electrical activities happens in the neurons while chemical activities takes place in the synapse. Now, I want to say that there are chemical messengers that are released by the axon terminal or the synaptic knob into the synaptic cleft. I repeat, chemical messengers releases what? Chemical from the axon terminal or the synaptic knob into the synaptic cleft. Now, these chemical messengers are known as neurotransmitters. And common examples of neurotransmitters we have is dopamine, serotonin, acetylcholine, also known as adrenaline. We have the noradrenaline and we have the gamma amino butyric acid known as GABA. All these are chemical messengers released by what? The synaptic knob into the synaptic cleft. Now, what happened? When impulses come from the presynaptic, as they enter into the synapse, the synaptic knob will release these chemical messengers. This impulse will be carried by this chemical into the postsynaptic part. Now, into the postsynaptic neurons. Now, these impulses will continue their propagation, while the chemical messengers are either destroyed by enzymes or reabsorbed back into the synaptic knob. They are either destroyed by enzyme or reabsorbed back into the synaptic knob. What are the importance of neurons? Want to say that the neurons are responsible for sensory perception. They are also they are one of the another function is motor control, cognitive function, example learning, and they are also responsible for emotional regulation. That is the work of the neurons. Okay, let's look at the neurogland, which is the second aspect of the nervous tissue. We have just summarized the neurons. Now let's look at the neurogland, also known as the glial cells. We want to say that the neurogland are classified into two: macrogland and microgland. Macrogland, this is macrogland and microgland. Now, the macrogland is divided into three, or into four rather. The macrogland is divided into four. We have the first one, the astrocyte. The first one is known as the astrocyte. And the astrocyte, we want to say that there are two divisions of the astrocyte. But before we get to those two divisions, I want to say that the astrocyte are star-shaped cells that provide structural support to the neurons. They provide structural support to the neurons. So they regulate extracellular environment. Therefore, we know that the astrocyte join to form what we call the blood-brain barrier. Satellite cells that have the same function as the astrocyte but are not found in the PNS. There are two types of astrocyte. They are, so I just defined satellite cells. I say they have the same function as the astrocyte, but they are not, they are found where? In the PNS. Now I say there are two types of astrocyte. We have the protoplasmic astrocyte and the fibrous astrocyte. Now, which one is the protoplasmic astrocyte? They are found in the gray matter. The protoplasmic astrocytes are found in the gray matter, while the fibrous astrocytes are found in the white matter. Then we have the second type of microglia, which is a type of neuroglia called oligodendrocyte. And we say they are the ones that produce myelin sheath where? In the CNS, and they speed up signal transmission. Then we have the Schwann cells, which are the ones that produce myelin sheath in the PNS. Then we have the ependymal cells. They line the ventricles. We are going to talk about them with time. But remember that they produces the CNS, the CSF, cerebrospinal fluid. The ependymal cell produce cerebrospinal fluid. Also, they have cilia that regulate the CSF. Then we say the second division of the neuroglia is the microglia, and they are the one that are responsible for immune cell response in the CNS. They monitor the environment for signs of injury or infection. They also remove dead cells and debris. They are responsible for removing dead cells and debris. Responsible for removing dead cell